I didn't read something at age 40 for the first time and say, how do I deconstruct this? How am I read this critically, read this academically, and then try to take the elements out of it to replicate with the story of my own? No, I already had this foundation built. It was not about copying anybody else, but about being inspired by all these authors that I read over a lifetime. So if people are noticing that it's not formulaic, I mean, I love that. And I don't think about that going in. Rather, I think about the story. It's all about moving the story forward and then even moving the genre forward, even if it's by a degree.
Is that much of it? That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Carrie Kite. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post-9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills. Episode 96 features Jack Carr, the author and novelist of the Terminalist series, featuring James Reese, co-executive producer of the television show of the same name starring Chris Pratt, with an upcoming spin-off prequel called Terminalist Dark Wolf starring Taylor Kitsch. His next novel in the series, Red Sky Mourning, is released on June 18th. Welcome. This is Veteran Made. This episode is brought to you by Go Pills, a nootropic that gives your brain neurotransmitter support both acutely and over time. Those of us that served in the military, regardless of where we served and in what capacity we served, all came into contact with different chemicals, different percussions, and various elements of our environments that have affected our brain's ability to function. Think about your brain's performance and your mental health right now, yes, but think about your future too. We have so much more control over our long-term health than we realize. Visit gopills.com and use code VM15 at checkout for 15% off. That's VM15 for 15% off. Give your brain the neurotransmitter support it needs to perform well right now and over time.
Action.
Jack, do it. What's up, man?
Jack is back. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Excited for Red Sky Mourning here in a couple weeks.
Me too, man. It turned into a long book. I didn't realize it was going to end up being so long, so I had to push the publication date about a month. But you just don't know when you start. I kind of thought I had an idea, now of this being the seventh one, that it'll be about 115, 120,000 words, and then ended up being a lot longer, almost 150,000. So it's which is the same price as the other book, so you get more for your money.
I love it. And for those that have pre-ordered and will pre-order this before it comes out, they'll get that price, which is great. What was that like for you? At what stage did you know, hey, I've got more here? And what was the decision-making process like for you to have that conversation?
Yeah, it's just, you just don't know, because you're moving through it and then you come to something and have to do a little more research, and that takes a little while, and that leads to something else, which leads to something else. And you just, I don't know. It's just, even though this was the seventh one, you got to honor the story. So for me, it's not about getting to 100,000 words and wrapping it up, which is these types of novels are typically about 100,000 words, 110-ish. Like, that's when you see a book like this in the thriller genre, that's the word count. But I just can't do it. I have to just go until it's natural for the story to wrap up. I know when I start, I know where I start, I know where I'm going. I know a few things in between because I've outlined it. But as I go, just some chapters take longer than others. Research takes a little longer. You find something else and have to go back and set something up earlier on. So it's just, you just never know, I guess. I guess that was the lesson this time, is that even though I've done it now 7 times, even for the 8th, I won't know exactly how long it's going to take. So better get started early.
Yeah, I mean, was it enjoyable for you to look at that and say, oh, wow, I've got a lot of extra here. Let me kind of go back into other portions. Did you enjoy that portion of the process, or did it feel like a slog at that point?
Oh, no, I love every part of the process. It's more just like people are waiting, deadlines, publishers waiting, all that sort of thing. But hey, the story, they're great. They don't push, but it's looming. But they want the best story that I can produce as well, which is what it's all about for me. So it has to be about that story. Got to honor that story, because people that are trusting me with time, they're never going to get back. It respects them by putting my heart and soul into every single word. So it's So I love every part of it, and I guess without a deadline, maybe I'd still be writing it. But I know it's a complete story. That's the thing. So and I know it's better than the others. So for me, that's what it's all about. Always, it's continual improvement in everything that I'm doing. So for me, my favorite book is always the last one at this point, anyway. The last one that I've just done, and I think the reason for that is because I feel like they've all improved, and I've improved as a writer with each one. So that's always my goal: get better at my craft, and that's what I owe the audience as well. And I'm never going to change anything because I need to wrap something up, or because is a short chapter or longer chapters popular, or what do you think people want? Am I going to alienate anyone because I say something or a character says something or whatever? I never think about that at all. It's 100% about honoring that story. So this one just took 150,000 words.
Yeah, it's one of the cool things about reading a series of novels, especially an ongoing series, or even if you've gone back and read, somebody who wrote a series that ended, a while ago, you can see the growth in the author from book to book, which is an odd thing, right? Because like as a published thriller author, you're at an elite level, but that learning and that growth doesn't ever actually go away, right? You're always on that path to get better, and especially for you because you've deviated a bit from the formulaic nature of these kind of thriller novels. Like as you were just describing it, I was like, one of the first questions I wanted to ask was how does it feel at this point to be taking Reese on this journey, whatever journey it is that he's on that isn't formulaic? It's not, you have a set structure for each novel. You don't. You go in and tell the story that the story wants you to tell.
No, exactly right. And I think I'm so fortunate that I was listening to a podcast this morning, these guys on My First Million, and they were talking to an investor and a guy from India. And he was talking about how the critical years between age 10 and 20, and just how critical those years are. As he talked about Bill Gates programming at like age 11, and just how that built this foundation that allowed him to then accelerate in his 20s and 30s and do the things that he did. And he gave a few other examples as well. Warren Buffett was another example that he gave of starting those businesses so early on, back in the day, buying a wholesale Coca-Cola from I think his uncle's store or something like that, and then selling it at retail type, that sort of a thing. And just all those businesses at that young age that he did. And for me, it was reading, and I was reading at those young ages, and I was just enjoying the magic in those pages. Right at that age, that critical age that this guy was talking about, 10, that's when I switched over from young adult type fiction into the same type of books my parents were reading. Certainly by age 11, 100%, I'm reading the same kind of books that I read and write today in the thriller genre. And that's right about the time that Hunt for Red October came out. It's the 40th anniversary of Hunt for Red October this year. So I give a little nod to Tom Clancy in this book with the prologue in particular. That's my 7th book. So I also give a nod after nod to Ian Fleming and Bond throughout these pages. That'll be maybe obvious a couple, but a lot of them will be way less obvious, and people are going to have to search even if they're Bond and Fleming fans. So that's a long way of saying I got to build up this foundation early on, and that allows me now to build off that going forward. So for me, I didn't read something at age 40 for the first time and say, how do I deconstruct this? How am I going to read this critically, read this academically, and then try to take the elements out of it to replicate with the story of my own? No, I already had this foundation built, but in a different way, because it was all really just about that magic and about that story, not about making money, not about copying anybody else, but about being inspired by all these authors that I read over a lifetime. So if people are noticing that it's not formulaic, I love that. And I don't think about that going in. Rather, I think about the story. And it's all about that story and moving the story forward, and then even moving the genre forward, even if it's by a degree. So that's always been my goal.
What parameters do you put in place for yourself to deviate? I was actually listening to some of your Q&As in the lead up to this earlier this morning. And you had mentioned a couple of places where I think like with Freddie in particular, you had a certain idea of what you wanted him to be, and you wanted him to be a recurring character, but then the story told you he's got to go. So how much room do you give yourself, and what parameters do you put in place, if any, to deviate?
Yeah, no parameters really. I know that something like that'll happen in each book. There's one, I think in the first book, I won't say exactly what it is, but the way I had it outlined, and even the way that I had the chapter in my mind there was no question as I sat down to type it out on my computer, the way it was going to go. And then as soon as I put my hands on that keyboard, nope, totally different for the better. But it's interesting that it didn't happen until that point when I went to put and I thought about it for months and months and months. But it didn't change until that moment. So I think there's always going to be something like that in each and every book. There were two characters in The Devil's Hand who, in outline phase, are gonna get whacked at the end, and I just ended up liking them too much. They're like bad guys ish, but they're like surveilling Reese and doing all this stuff, and just the banter that I had back and forth between these two characters, I just got to like them, even though they're kind of a little bit, I guess, a little bit silly. One's professional, one's kind of ish professional wannabe, I guess. But just the banter back and forth, and that's where I get to know the characters really, is when they're talking to other characters. So as I start, I'll have a list of characters, and I'll have a name, and I'll have a position like president of Russia, or head of the Russian intelligence service, Chinese intelligence service, whatever. But I don't really know what their personality is like, and like who they are, other than their position, and if they're a good guy or bad guy type of a thing, until I start putting them into dialogue with other characters. And that's when I get to know them. So I found that really made things change, particularly in The Devil's Hand. And once again, I think for the better. I couldn't kill, when I got to the point at the end, I couldn't kill those guys. They were and same thing with readers. I think readers really liked those two characters. And if I killed them, it would have been like, oh, he just stuck to an outline probably, or didn't deviate, or he had this in his head and just kept stuck with it. But for me, think you're going to develop and grow every single day as a person, for me as an author, citizen, and that's what happens. So there's no real parameters as far as that stuff goes. Once again, it all comes back to story.
Yeah, but if you hadn't done that pre-work, written the outline, thought through all these things about the story that you thought you wanted, you wouldn't actually have that foundation to work from to make the adjustment that the story is requiring of you.
Sure. Yeah, I never thought of it like that, but entirely true. It allows me the freedom to deviate because I know where the story's going. I know who's in play, and that allows me then the creative leeway as I go and as the story continues to develop. And I see that in screenwriting too with the series. This time I'm writing the finale with the showrunner David DiGilio, and we created this spin-off series together. Awesome guy, but you see that because actors bring certain things to the roles that you didn't see initially just on paper as you wrote out the script. So they brought something, and they started that in episode 1 and 2, which changes things in episode 3, 4, 5, 6. And so you're making adjustments to those later episodes based on what the actor has brought and how things have developed throughout the season, relationship wise between characters that may have morphed a little bit just because of what the individual actresses brought to the roles. So it's interesting, and it's just important to be able to adapt both in life and on the page.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool to hear you say that what Taylor Kitsch brought to that character was, and what the writer, I think you had mentioned something about the writers. You said the writer's room handled that character better than you did on the pages of the novel. And you actually felt great about that because it allowed Taylor Kitsch to jump in and really bring that character to life. Is that what drove the prequel spinoff, or did you have the Terminal Verse in mind kind of from the beginning?
No, I didn't really have. I thought there was a possibility of maybe some spin-off type shows for different characters. And I actually wrote I guess you call it an executive summary, but it's all broken down by episode for a different type of a different spin-off. But then Chris called me about the time I was going to pitch it to him. And he said, hey, what do you think about a Ben Edwards spin-off? And I said, absolutely, Chris, that's 100%. Let's do it. And that's all because of what Taylor brought to the role and what the writers did in the writer's room that allowed Taylor to then build off that and create this character much different than the one that I had in the pages of the Terminal List. And that's for sure a character that was much better on screen than in the pages of the novel. And I wish I thought about some of the things that they figured out in the writer's room and that Taylor brought to the role for the novel. But hey, that's just how it goes.
Yeah, but I mean, but your North Star is getting better. So that all that did was just help you understand that you can get better. There's nothing to feel bad about at that point. And how did it actually feel to have such, not just, a response from Chris and Antoine to greenlight it and EP it and make it and get it made, but then to actually get inside their brains and hearts and say on his own, hey, we should make something else. What did that, like, as a fan and as just a human and as a creator, what did that feel like for you to field that call from him?
No, I mean, I feel so fortunate, I feel fortunate that we're doing something that we can be creative, that we can expand this universe, that you can give these different people, I mean, the people that work on these sets, it's not just the actor that goes up and accepts an award, at the Oscars or whatever else. There's like 350 other people on set making this stuff happen every day. And being able to like create that environment and have all these people come up to me on set and say that they've worked on hundreds of different Hollywood sets, but they've never felt this way before on a set. And that's because Chris and Antoine at the top and the showrunner, and that just all filters down to encouraging, inspirational, fun. Everybody's bringing their A game, and it's so cool to get everybody back together to continue that journey. So it feels, I mean, it feels great. It feels great. I don't know another way to describe it other than that.
I mean, you're 7 books in, you're starting a nonfiction series as well, and you're writing and working, producing, EPing multiple seasons of these multiple series now at this point. You've talked before about the different constraints, like the constraints on a screenplay are budgetary, right? Like you have to be thinking about locations and casting and art department and all of these different things. But as you're writing a novel, you don't have to think about that because it's just you and the reader, or you and the reader and Ray if they're listening, right? So has that affected the way that you are writing later series in the novels? Or have you been able to separate, hey, these are the novels, I'm going to write this the way that I want, and then if and when we get to this as a season of television, we'll address it then?
Yeah, no, it hasn't impacted the writing in that way. Meaning I'm not thinking, oh, I need to do something here in the pages of the novel because it'll translate over on set a certain way, or there's constraints. No, I always keep it no constraints with writing the novels. I have 100% creative control with that. No even hint to ever change anything from Simon and Schuster standpoint. So they've given me 100% creative control from the very beginning, which is amazing. I didn't know how that was going to play out, but that's how it plays out. And I think it plays out like the way for most people. My agents never suggested anything. Like it's great. Screenwriting in the show, like you said, totally different. And you might have a great idea for something, for a location, like to wrap up a show, but that might not be in the cards, and you're going to have to work with what you have, which is challenging in its own right. And it's great to have challenges, and because you're problem solving, which is awesome. So I guess that problem solving for me on the page, it's just me on the novels. Now, problem solving with the team, totally different for screenwriting, because you have your showrunner, you have a writer's room for a certain amount of time, then they go off to other projects, and you keep the number 2 in the writer's room, other EPs. And so you're solving those problems together. Like, yes, this one thing that you had in mind at the beginning when you wrote this is great, but we're not going to be able to pick up this whole set and this whole crew and fly these people to X country, or even make it look that way with visual effects. We can do certain things, but we can't do that. So what can we do? How do we solve this problem? And then having everybody brainstorm on it and figure it out and creatively address the issue. So it's not necessarily a problem. It's just how it is. And I wouldn't even say that that's a constraint. I'd say there's more constraints when you're actually writing it, thinking it, because there's page count. There's an hour, 45 minutes to an hour and 10 minutes or something like that. And there's a storyline that you're following that is now built up to, let's say, episode 5, and you're doing episode 6. And you have to account for where it's going then in 7 and all of those sorts of things. So there's a lot, I guess, more to deal with when you're screenwriting. But on the pages of the novels, no constraints whatsoever.
Do you enjoy the craft of screenwriting and filmmaking? Like, now that you're in it and doing it, and it's not just, hey, my novel got optioned and greenlit and I get to participate a little bit in it. Now you're in it all the time and have been since season 1. From a craft perspective, that teamwork and the filmmaking and the translation from page to screen, like, how do you enjoy the craft of it?
Yeah, I love it because I'm learning. And I do think it the way it has impacted the novels, that I think have made them better, and people will be able to notice it. I think with In the Blood probably was the first one that maybe would have been influenced by the screenwriting side of the house, just because of when the screenwriting process happened and the way books came out before the show and all of that. So I think that's probably the one where people, if they were noticing, if they were tuned into it, they'd be able to notice how the screenwriting influenced one of the books. So In the Blood, 2 books ago, would be the one that would they'd be able to notice. But I love it. I mean, it's different, but I love the team. I can see how you could have a different experience though. I think people in Hollywood like to tell me all the time that I've had a very blessed experience, just because of the team that got put together. And it's not always like that. That's what they like to say. Hey, it's not always like this, just so you know. And I can see how it can very easily go off the rails. And if you have different people in place or egos in play, or all sorts of things can happen with all these people in the mix, that can derail a project or just make it or can make it horrible. And so that part is interesting. And that part isn't it. Well, another reason it's interesting is because, like, as the author, if you're involved, which I am, you'll get blamed.
Right,
It's
right.
just how it is. It's like, well, people are like, why didn't you get so and so to play this character? You don't just get someone to play a character, but you can explain that on social media. People get really mad about
Yeah.
things. You're like, well, there's so many things. Maybe you even wanted that person to play the role, but perhaps they're doing another show. Perhaps they're not interested. Perhaps their team didn't want them to do it, or maybe they wanted to do it, but they have this other thing, or they have lives too. Like, all sorts of things come into play there. But people, for some reason, like someone to direct that towards, so that becomes you. And I think most authors don't have that. Most authors say, "Oh, yeah, I optioned it. Hollywood took it, and I have no involvement." And that's usually what happens. Hollywood doesn't want the author there on the set saying, "You ruined my vision," because they have that experience in the past. And so, in order not to have that, they option it, they take it, they adapt it, and make it into something. And if it's good, it's good. If it's not, it's not. And if the fans like it, they like it. And if they don't, they don't. But the author really has very little impact on that. But now, if you're involved, like I am in this, you realize that, things can, like the Taylor Kitsch example of making it so much better than the character in the book. And then you can have things that are like, well, what can you do? There's just, and a lot of times they'll make things better. Like some ideas that I had for the first one, the ideas that the rest of the team had were so much better. And then we had a couple that I had that ended up being the ones that we did that were great. But some of my ideas were not great. So I think I heard Matt Damon actually talking about that on a little thing that popped up on my Instagram. He said, you have to have the bad ideas out there in order to get the good ones. Like, and I see that all the time in brainstorming sessions. There'll be horrible ideas, but those will lead to great ideas. Because of the discussion side of it. So you can't be afraid to open your mouth and put something out there. And then you got to trust. In the end, you got to also trust the process and trust the experience of those people that you're with. And that's where the team comes into play.
Who was the driver of your involvement so in such an integrated way? Was it the team, or was that you? Did you kind of push for that, or was that Chris and Antoine, David? Like, how did that? Because it is uncommon. That is true. So how did you get this experience?
Yeah, not by contract. By contract, there's zero creative control, but it's Chris and Antoine wanted me involved from the beginning. And so they kind of set the tone for that, and then introduced me to David DiGilio, the showrunner, in December of 2019. And then we've talked every day since, to include this morning. So it's been a great team from the very beginning. But I think it's really because Chris and Antoine said, hey, we want Jack involved in all aspects of this. And so I've been able to learn a ton, and it's led to other things, and it's just been fantastic.
How has the level of creation that your output, because you've talked a lot, and we talked about this last time, you talked a lot about how you didn't write much when you were growing up and when you were on the teams. You were just reading and consuming on that end as a fan, because you wanted to feel it. You've used the Tarantino example before. What's the consumption to creation ratio for you now, and how do you choose what to consume as you're creating in all these different genres?
Well, it's certainly flipped. That's a great question. No one's asked me that before. It is certainly flipped 180. So all growing up from, let's say, well, before I was 10, but that was young adult fiction. And then from 10 on, and not just fiction, but nonfiction, specifically warfare, terrorism, counterinsurgencies, anything that could have made me a better leader and operator later in life as I looked forward towards what I wanted to do. But now, and that stayed the same way throughout my entire life, but now that is definitely flipped. Now it takes a long time to write a 150,000 word novel, and then to edit that, go back and edit that, So it's that's just time. That's just like time on the mat. So you're putting that time in. And now when I read something, typically someone's asking me to blurb it. And so I'll read it really fast and give them a blurb, because you can't sit down and just take a week to just sit there in a hammock and enjoy it page by page. And all. No, because it's go time. You have deadlines and you're writing scripts, and I'm writing the books, and like you said, the nonfiction and all this other stuff. So it is certainly flipped. Now the things that I read, if it's in the genre, it's a quick read for a blurb because someone asked me, or it is research for one of the books or for a podcast guest. So now it's all like that. So at some point I heard Lee Child talking about what he was looking forward to most about retirement. He's turned the Jack Reacher series over to his brother. And he said, being able to sit down and read for pleasure. And I totally understand that. 7 years in now, I totally get it. Says it takes a long time to write these things.
Yeah, one day, but hopefully not soon. You'll have that opportunity to go back to that type of reading. Yeah, I saw. It's funny. I saw that you blurbed Joe and Marty's book, Send Me, and I literally finished the book minutes before they hopped on Riverside for me to chat to them about it, because life got so busy, work got so busy, this got so busy, you're doing all this different stuff. And it's like, oh, I haven't read the book yet. I got to get up early tomorrow morning, read the whole thing, and then chat to him about it, which made for, I think, a better interview probably. But yeah.
I think it does, because when you read something a little like a week beforehand, then so many other things happen in that week that you can go back to your questions. That's important, and that gets you through, obviously. But when it's fresh, especially if you're reading something quickly, then I think you're right. I think it does make for a better interview because it's just so fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be respectful of your time. We got about 4 minutes left. Anything you want to talk about this? So this will come out 2 weeks before the book launch. So this will be a bit of a pre-order run. Anything you want to say about Red Sky Mourning specifically as a tease before we jump into the final questions here?
Well, for people that are writers, or the prologue, I thought when I started it was going to be like a normal prologue, like I've had in the other books. It's a few pages long. It sets the tone. I have a preface that really sets the tone for me personally, but then you dive into the book and that prologue sets it up in the fictional narrative. And I wanted to do something that gave a little nod to Tom Clancy, so submarine centric, with the 40th anniversary of Hunt for Red October. But I thought it was going to be about the same length as these other ones. And it turned into almost a book in and of itself. So the prologue, and it took a lot of research because my time in the military was not on submarines. So that meant I had to do all this research. And then I wanted it to ring true to submariners, even if I was taking a little bit of license here and there, which I describe in the author's note at the end. But yeah, it took a lot more research than I thought, and it ended up being a lot longer, just that prologue, than I thought. So that one took a lot out of me. But so it's different. But once again, I didn't feel those constraints like, oh no, I can't have a prologue that's this long. And I was kind of curious if Simon and Schuster was going to say, hey, you need to cut this prologue down because prologues aren't this long. Nothing. They did not mention anything about the prologue being too long, which is interesting. Same thing with True Believer, my second book. The whole first part, I thought they might just cut the first third of that book because it takes James Reese on this journey where he learns to live again, finds his next mission in life, purpose. And I thought maybe they'd come back and say, hey, this whole first third, turn that into just one chapter or a few sentences. That'll cover it. And then just do what you did before, type of a thing. Nothing. They did not say that, which kind of surprised me because that was my first test of how much creative control do I really have? They haven't mentioned anything yet, but I could see them coming back and saying this here. Nope. They let me do the whole thing, keep the whole thing in there. So same thing with this prologue. It's not typical of an author to do something like this, but once again, not even a question raised from Simon & Schuster about it, which was really cool.
That's great. You've got two sets of great teams on the film and TV side and on the editorial side. And that's why the fans love it. I mean, I'm not going to obviously name the series because that would be unfair to the author who put so much work into it. But there's one of those series that I just stopped reading because it was just the same novel every time with a different setting and a slightly different world ending scenario. And so I remember getting to book 2 and I was like, oh, this is so different. Like I want to just keep going and I want to go along with him. And so I know the fans love that. And I'm glad that the editorial team sees it that way as well. So yeah, we'll tag everything out. I'll get a link, pre-order link from David and we'll throw it up in the bio and in the show notes and all of that. And we'll tag Jack Carr USA, right, for those who are listening. So the last minute, would love to chat. We have 2 questions I asked to end each episode. what's on your heart and your mind for our community, military community, veteran community, American community. Piece of advice, something you want to get off your chest, something you want to reiterate. Jack, what's on your heart and your mind?
Not really. It's more that hope. It's something that I think about. Maybe other people do as well. Because if we look at the news, or we look at how we're being manipulated via that news or social media or whatever it might be, I always have to take a moment to breathe and say, you know what, these loud voices might not even be people. And the purpose of whatever this electronic feed is to manipulate me into doing something. So or feeling a certain way, behaviors, thoughts, not just, buy something, which would be fine. Much better, like a commercial back in the day, but now it's to impact behaviors and really change the direction of this country. So I think being aware of that and being able to put that stuff aside, and then being able to pass that on to kids who are obviously even more susceptible to that influence and manipulation than we are as adults. And we're certainly susceptible as well. So I think it's that deluge of bad news and the direction the country is headed, and realizing that, hey, it might not be as bad as my X feed makes it seem.
No doubt. Well said, sir. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your words. Excited to read Red Sky Mourning.
Thanks so much. Appreciate having me on. Always have a great conversation with you, and really appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks, Jack.
Take care.